Another blood-red sunset and yet another moon face, and still another 100 miles to my next resting place. Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all alone, but feeling good and feeling strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving.
Hey now all, I'm Joey C. Welcome back to another episode of Spirit Sherpa. This is the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. With me as always is the Spirit Doctor, Kelle Sparta. Hey Kelly.
Hey Joey.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
I'm out house hunting, trying to find a place to be.
Yeah, we can see, for those who are watching the video, we can see that you're still in the hotel. So you still got flood issues.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So, but we have an offer in on a house and it's been verbally accepted, but we've been waiting for, almost 36 hours to get them to actually sign the offer.
Wow, that's a really long time.
It is a very long time. Travis might be able to tell me he's psychic.
Well, with that, let's talk about our guest today.
So today I'm really excited. Travis Sanders is here, and he is a psychic and a medium, and he is part of the Spiritualist church community. And I actually went to a Spiritualist church when I was having my great awakening 20 years ago, coming out of my divorce and everything. And I loved the Spiritualist church. And so when Travis contacted me, I was like, yes, please talk about that and that as a spiritual path. Travis has actually written a couple of books too. He's got one book called I Am Psychic, So Are You, which I love the title of. And then the other one is called Practical Mediumship. So we'll probably end up talking to him about some mediumship as well. As we go through this process. But welcome, Travis. I don't want to tell people everything. I want to let you talk.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So you grew up in the Spiritualist church, is that correct?
I actually grew up in the Pentecostal church.
You and Kathy.
so it was a bit of a transition. I came into spiritualism in my late teens. And it was something that was incredibly transformational for me because I started working psychically about 16 at psychic fairs. And when I was around 19, a teacher came into my life who was a spiritualist. Her parents were spiritualists in the church. Her grandparents were spiritualists in the Spiritualist church. And because I was Pentecostal, I didn't realize that like a lot of people who have more of a new age point of view, that spiritualism is an actual religion, that there's a philosophy to it beyond just talking to dead people. And that really shifted my paradigm. And since then, I've become very passionate not only about the philosophy of spiritualism and how it can comfort and help people, but also the history of it, because there's a very rich history behind it.
Well, I'm excited to hear all about it because, when I went, I got some great messages, and I found it to be a really welcoming community. And so, tell us a little bit about the church itself. How is it different than traditional Christian churches?
Most spiritualist churches, of which there are sort of different, I guess you could say different denominations. Whether you're in the US or the UK, there's always sort of a national church and then there's independent churches. So each church is going to look a little bit different, but any spiritualist church you go to is going to be most of the time, very similar to what you would expect from any sort of Protestant church. There's a lot of oftentimes Christian imagery. There's a little, I guess you could say, a sermon or a talk, for a lack of better words. But the real, I guess, turning point that's different than a lot of churches is after the message, mediums get up on the platform and give messages from the deceased to the congregation, which most people would probably be pretty good for the first half. But if they didn't know what they were stepping into, might find that a little bit unusual.
I have to tell you a funny story. The first time I went to a spiritualist church, they read the doctrine at the beginning, right? They have this list of things that they say, I believe in this, we believe in this, we believe in this, we don't believe in that, blah, 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 right? And don't take this the wrong way. I love the Spiritualist Church, but I barked out laughing at one point because here we are dogmatically reading off this list of beliefs, and it says, I don't believe in dogma. And I was like, and I was like, oh crap, I'm laughing in church. That's bad. They didn't appreciate it. But it was like, wait a minute, that's funny, but nobody appreciated it. But the messages are amazing. Mm-hmm. The people who come through are amazing. There's also the one I went to, or the two I went to, also had healing chairs.
Yes. Yep.
So talk about the healing chairs.
So in spiritualist churches, most services will have a healing portion, mm-hmm. and where what we call spirit healing differs a little bit than maybe things like Reiki or therapeutic touch, is that with things like Reiki and therapeutic touch, we're sort of working with a universal energy. And oftentimes in the spiritualist church, we think of mediumship as simply giving a message. But the mechanics of spirit healing is very similar in the way that we're sort of blending with the spirit world, except instead of using that blending to pass forward a message or evidence of life after death, oftentimes the healers are blending with what we might call spirit doctors or chemists or healers in the spirit world, and sort of acting as a medium or a conduit for healing energy for those who wish to receive it.
So kind of like channeling.
Yes, it's essentially channeling a spirit healer.
Oh, very cool.
I kind of do that a lot in my healing work. So yeah, that's really cool. I never did get a chance to take the classes that they were teaching there, but they sounded interesting. I moved out of the area before I had a chance.
Okay. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the history, the doctrine, the belief structures.
So spiritualism, most people, even if they're not necessarily familiar with spiritualism, are familiar with the Fox sisters when you talk about mediumship. Hydesville, 1848, there's the rappings, and that kind of ignited this craze of
the rappings.
So Maggie and Kate, the two youngest of the three Fox sisters, they were in their family home, their cottage, and what sort of happened were these knocking sounds. And those knockings turned into asking questions and eventually rapping out letters of the alphabet to sort of establish messages. And hundreds of people, and considering that this was the mid 1800s, the fact that you could get 100 people, let alone 300 people in one space, was really sort of phenomenal. But it really ignited this craze of spirit communication, because this was Civil War kind of time period. People didn't live very long. People wanted to know that their loved ones were okay. And so it sort of developed over time into this movement called spiritualism, mostly at the hands of the oldest sister, Leah, who a lot of people want to portray as a little bit of a stage mom, which is probably a little bit true. Mm-hmm. The thing that I like about Leah is that even though all the Fox sisters sort of had their flaws, was that she understood that this was more than just sitting around a table asking if someone was there, that life goes on after death. And unlike other faiths, which say this is what we believe because this book or this doctrine says it, and you just take our word for it, here's what I believe, but now I'm going to demonstrate to you why I believe it. And that to me was something that really set spiritualism apart. We're not just asking you to believe on blind faith. Let us demonstrate for you, and you can come to your own conclusion.
That sounds awesome. Now, they did a lot of seances and stuff, right?
Very much so. The earlier stages of spiritualism, the mediumship that was experienced was more a physical mediumship. So when we think of people like Teresa Caputo and John Edward, we're receiving those messages mentally and translating them and interpreting them. Physical mediumship was more objective. It took place outside the body. The medium had the necessary energies to allow different manifestations, whether it be voices or rapping, apports, which is when something appears in the seance room that wasn't there before. There's so many different things, transfiguration, levitation. And then over time, it sort of became more mental and a little less physical, partly because physical mediumship, I think, takes quite a long time to develop. And we have attention spans this big in this day and age. And then the other thing too is I think it was what was needed at the time. We needed that in your face sort of thing. And as it became more accepted, then it sort of phased into more of a mental phase of mediumship.
So can you define transfiguration for the listeners? I know that levitation is probably something they know, but that's probably a new word for them.
Transfiguration is a process where when the medium is entranced, they sort of allow a deeper blending of a spirit communicator to move into the aura. And it usually sort of coincides with trance speaking, whether it's philosophy or evidential messages. But what happens is a certain degree of ectoplasm is emitted from the body, and it allows the spirit communicator's likeness to almost be molded over top of the face of the medium who's entranced.
So this is, they're doing a heavy duty version of channeling that's sort of semi-possession.
You could look at it that way. It's such a close blending that it's almost like two becoming one.
Yeah.
And we can visually observe that when that happens.
It's like the possession with permission that we talked about before.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So presumably, now when presuming you've taken the classes at the Spiritualist Church, right?
I've done training at Camp Chesterfield, which is a spiritualist community in Indiana, and also Lilydale Assembly, which I think more people are familiar with Lilydale than Chesterfield. But some of my initial teacher, I guess you could call that, was a spiritualist. She was phenomenal trance medium, and I worked with her one-on-one for a few years. And then another medium that I've really gotten a lot out of, both in a formal class sense, but also just in having a friendship and relationship, is a Lilydale medium named Sharon Klingler. And they've both sort of helped me immensely in my mediumship.
So one of the things that we espouse a lot here on the show is safety first. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we did an episode on channeling, and we talked about, possession with permission and things like that, and versus being ridden like in voodoo and things like that, which is permission based as well, but different, right? Mm-hmm. It's you're gone, right? So it's an unconscious channel. So the type of mediumship that you're describing is one of those things that I would caution beginners about, because you merge that significantly with someone. If you're not really clear who you are, then separating can be challenging. Absolutely.
I think with any aspect of mediumship, you have to have a firm grasp on who you are. You have to have a firm knowing yourself is so important, because that's where I think true discernment comes in. And there may be people who are incredibly talented and gifted, but lack discernment. And then that's where things like mental illness can be exacerbated.
That's very astute. So you do mediumship fairly regularly?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us a couple of ghost stories. Give us a couple of stories.
Well, I don't. So when it comes to mediumship, I think a lot of people have this idea of, earthbound spirits and those in the light and things like that. I don't deal with any souls who aren't where they need to be. So my mediumship is pretty restricted to, you come to me because you want to hear from your loved one. Not that you might want to hear from Uncle Joe. I can't guarantee it's going to be Uncle Joe. But so if I'm in the office, the spirit world has my full attention. And if I'm not in the office, I'm pretty normal, which I think is a good thing to have those boundaries. But I have had some really phenomenal experiences in seance. One example of that is my very first physical seance that I ever sat in. I knew from knowledge and learning what to expect, but I wasn't, I think, experientially prepared for what was about to happen. And so we're in this seance room. It was a small group. It was very private about what they do, and they don't work, publicly. It's just a group. They've been sitting together for years and years. So we go into the room, the door's locked, all the lights get shut out. You can't see, your hand in front of your face. And we're doing things like we're singing to build the energy and maybe doing some ohms and stating some intentions. And then the next thing you know, the spirit trumpets, which I can explain in a second for those who might not be familiar, in the center of the room, you hear them all start rattling. And then the next thing you know, they're up in the air and voices are coming out of them. And I'm conversing with these disembodied voices that aren't the other sitters in the room, because I can hear them. And, we're all sitting in very small quarters. It's something that your mind can't wrap itself around, because it's not, it doesn't work with physics that we know and the experiences that we've had. And then these lights started appearing in the room in midair and dancing around and zipping around. And I knew what was potentially possible, but the experience of it was something that was very different. And I think that was something that changed me, because, and this is another thing that I really love about the spiritualist philosophy. If you examine any sort of culture and sort of take a inventory, about 70% of people believe in life after death. If you were to take those same people and they have some sort of an experience that's so profound that they shift from believing that there's life after death, which implies doubt, to I've had this experience that I know, then you live your life differently.
Yeah, that's very true. Speaking as a medium as well, and having talked to many people who have crossed over, I'm like, yeah, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind exactly what happens on the other side. I have no concerns about dying. I am not worried about it at all. And when my friends pass, I'm like, hey, I'll see you on the other side.
Right.
It's like, we'll sit and chat while you're, at the funeral. Right.
Yeah.
I watched my dad make all kinds of, noises at his funeral. So that was,
okay.
I was like, okay, I'm just going to pretend I don't see you.
Right.
So I've been there. Yeah. So that's cool. That's really cool. Our listeners love to hear the stories. So, cool stories are always good. So you're also a psychic.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit. Did you get that training in the spiritualist path as well, or is that from somewhere else?
To this day, I'm still trying to figure out where it came from, because like I said, I grew up Pentecostal in the middle of a cornfield, in rural Ohio. And so it was just one of those things that was always there. And I assumed everyone saw things and everyone felt things. And it really kind of blew my mind when I put two and two together that, hey, not everybody has images in their head or sees figures or colors around people or whatever. I just assumed they all experience the world in the same way. That's what sort of sent me in the direction that led me to spiritualism, because I was like, I'm a freak, I'm broken, I need some answers. And so that sort of sent me on this journey of searching. The psychic part of what I do is such a natural thing. I always joke, I could do it in my sleep or do it with my eyes closed, because it was just something that was always there. The mediumship actually didn't come until later. So the first few years as a reader, I was primarily geared towards working psychically, because that's the only thing that I knew. And there had always been, from the time that I was little experiences of spirit, but I never had a communication. It was never a two-way street. And it wasn't until high school that happened, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I told them to go away. I didn't want any part of it. I even ran to the other side of the country to get away from it. And in 2012, I moved back to where I live in Ohio. And one lady contacted me, and she's like, hey, I've heard really good things about you. I want to connect with someone. Are you interested? And I'm like, I don't really like this, but I'll try. I can't guarantee anything. And so we did. I went to her house and we sat, and it was probably to this day one of the most intense, profound connections that I've had with someone that had passed, where the communication was so effortless. And even though I didn't want to do it, after that, it's like more and more people kept finding me for it. And eventually I said, okay, you win. And now I would say my clientele is about 50-50.
Yeah. Many years ago, a friend of mine looked at me and said, you do realize that the dead are lined up to talk to you? And I was like, No, I hadn't realized that. I mean, they do come to talk to me periodically. She's like, no, there's lots of them. And I'm like, oh, and she's like, you could do the whole John Edward thing if you wanted to. And I was like, no, like, I don't want. And it wasn't because I didn't want to do mediumship, because I'm perfectly happy to talk to dead people. But I had worked for a medium as his receptionist. And, I saw how many grieving people he dealt with on a daily basis. And I was just like, I want my life to be surrounded by a little more joy than that. So I'm hats off to you that you do the work, because it's big. It's big work. And, I just want to give you props for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's definitely something that I wouldn't have picked for myself. And there are times where I get frustrated, and every time I feel like I'm at that final thread, Spirit always does something to kind of bring me back to why I came to it in the first place.
So I understand you've got something where you're doing like YouTube stuff and Facebook Live?
Yeah, every Wednesday I do at 7:00 Eastern. I've been doing I guess you could sort of call it like a little pod class or online class for accessing the Akashic records. And so that's just going through however long it takes. Last week was the first one, but I do that from time to time because teaching is one of my favorite things to do. And so many times people physically or geographically can't be there. So before I did a series, it was a 6 or 7 week series on developing mediumship. And then all of those end up eventually getting transferred to YouTube. So, if you're interested in that or the Akashic records, you can definitely tune into that or catch the playback at your convenience.
Okay. And you're going to give us those links at the end so that we'll put them in the show notes too, so people can find you.
Yeah.
So you're making your living as a medium and a psychic, right? Mm-hmm. How long have you been doing that?
Full time, I've been doing this since 2012.
2012. Okay. So since the official end of the world.
Yes. End of the world and the start of a whole new one.
Start of the whole new one. Right.
Yeah.
If you were to give some advice to our listeners about what, if they're thinking about trying to make a living doing this sort of stuff, what would you say to them?
One of the biggest things is, one, be sure that you're ready to make the jump. I see a lot where people, they take a class or whatever and they get excited and then they get out in front of their skis and then they feel like a failure when they need to go back into the traditional corporate world or whatever their job is. And so know that it's not easy. There's always a hustle. You always have to be incredibly self-motivated, but it's so richly rewarding. The other thing too that I think is important for anyone in the metaphysical line of business is try to capitalize upon multiple streams of revenue. It's great if you have your one thing, but if you can convert that into podcasts or books or classes, because there are going to be times when your readings are slow or your healings are slow. And so just save and look at different ways that gift can be expressed to your target people. Yeah,
that's great advice. I would add to that, make sure that you build your business while you still have your full-time job.
Yes.
And build it to the point where you can't do both at the same time anymore. And if you're not busy enough that you literally physically can't do both at the same time, it's not time to quit your job yet.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's incredibly wise.
Yeah. So I see way too many people do exactly what you said, get in front of their skis. I haven't heard that phrase before, but it's a perfect way of saying it, where they dump their life and then they're scrabbling trying to pay rent, and it's very hard to be spiritual when you're in survival mode.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's one of the things that I warn people about a lot.
Very smart.
Have you had any experiences where you hit something that scared you?
Honestly, I've never hit anything that scared me.
Okay.
I've had things that have shook me, but I've never had an experience with the spirit world that was dark or uncomfortable. And I know that's not the case for everyone. So maybe I'm just lucky. I don't know. But I think too, with
protected. Yeah.
Yeah. With, the spiritualist philosophy, everything is all about natural law. And so my intent when I work with the spirit world is I want to work from a place of love, because that's the only thing I want in return. Mm-hmm. And I tell people, because a lot of people watch these shows that are on TV, and I'm like, if you're going to go looking for the boogeyman, you'll find what you're looking for. So just be sure that that's what you want to look for.
Yeah. And, I do energy scans. Mm-hmm. So like I'll send a tendril of energy out and do my empathic thing with someone. And I have been swarmed before by something that was attached to the other person. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was asking, because of the way that you're doing mediumship and things like that. I was like, that could have its own entertainment. So, whatever you're doing is clearly working for you. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I take a really long time before I'll teach anybody how to do the energy scans, is because, you want to make sure you can protect yourself. So right. Joey, you've been awfully quiet over there.
Well, you guys have been talking. I tried to jump in a couple times, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, all right. Do you have any questions for Travis, Joey?
I was just going to ask how people can get a hold of you, Travis. What are some ways that people can reach out to you? I'm sure that they might have some questions for you or be interested in what you've got to offer.
Sure. A lot of people, most of the people come through my website, which is just psychictravissanders.com. On Facebook, it's Travis Sanders Clairvoyant Medium. And, if it's just for a service or whatever, it's probably best to go through the website. But I often love to just connecting with people to give them direction or insight. Or sometimes people might come and say, hey, I'm interested in learning this. And even if it's something that I don't specifically have a handle on, I know enough to say, this is the person you need to talk to, or these are the teachers you should look at, because, I wish I had that when I was younger. So if I can point someone in the right direction, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, I love that.
Excellent.
I do a lot of that too. So I totally relate.
All right. Is there anything else that either of you want to say before we go into wrap up?
I just thank you for having me. I've had fun.
I'm glad you reached out. Travis actually reached out to me and said, hey, you should have me on your podcast. And you know what? He was right.
He certainly was.
That's awesome.
All right.
So this is me saying, you know what? I do have one message that I want to send out to people.
Okay.
Just given the timing right now, and it's unrelated to our conversation, but people have been asking me in my program about this, and so I just want to put it out for the rest of you. Things are really hard right now. Things are taking like 5 times longer than they should. And it's like slogging through molasses to get things done and moving forward. And there's a lot of upheaval happening for people. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that you're not alone if that's what you're experiencing. I'm not an astrologer, but usually these sorts of things are astrological. I just read a thing from one of my mailing lists that I do, Elizabeth Losi. I follow her as an astrologer, and she was writing that Jupiter is finishing up in its own sign and will be there only for one more week. And there's a lot of conjuncts happening, and Venus and something where you can tell astrology is not my thing. But there are a bunch of conjunctions going on. So things are happening, and her spin on it was that everything was going to get better soon. So, it was all working in a particular direction, and that, things would look sort of like, oh no, and then they would be okay. So if you're in the, oh no phase with me, trying to get my house done, just hang in there. It's breakdown before breakthrough. That's all I can say. Okay. So that's my thought for the day. Do you have anything to add to that, Travis?
No, I think for a lot of people overall, 2019 has been very just chaotic. And I do really feel as we move into 2020, there's just more of a smoothness overall. And like you, I'm not an astrologer or numerologist. That's not my forte, but just intuitively feeling into it, it just feels much more manageable and like there's much more breathing room. So I think that we're just sort of at that last little bit, and we just got to ride that out. So I appreciate everything you shared there.
Awesome.
All right, Joey,
Well,
I think that's it.
That's it. And very much thank you, Travis, for joining us here tonight. And thanks everybody else. And that is all that we have for this week. But be sure to join us next time as Kelle adds another chapter into your guide to energy, magic, and the spirit world. I'm Joey C. here with Kelle Sparta and Travis Sanders, and you have been listening to Spirit Sherpa. So long, everyone.
Bye.
Each mile I travel over 13,000 now. I leave behind a little fear.
Spirit Sherpa is the sole property of Kelle Sparta Enterprises and is distributed under Creative Commons BY-NC-ND 4.0 license. For more information about this licensing, please go to creativecommons.org. Any requests for deviations to this licensing should be sent to KELLE@KELLESPARTA.com. That's Kelly@KelleSparta.com. To sign up or to get more information on the programs, offerings, and services referenced in this episode, please go to KelleSparta.com. This episode of Spirit Sherpa has been produced by Honu Voice Productions.